Hi, in this video I want to offer you a different idea that might help you understand the writings of Ernest Holmes and other metaphysical teachers. Consciously using a mental map of the universe as you read them. I first came to Science of Mind over 35 years ago, and I've been teaching it for over 20 years. One of the common complaints I get from people who are first encountering Science of Mind is the difficulty of reading Ernest Holmes. Many people have told me they have a hard time understanding just exactly what he's saying. A couple of years ago, I hit upon the idea of reading him, as well as other metaphysical teachers, with a map of the spiritual universe in my mind as I read them. I found that to be helpful, and so I created a presentation which I've taught to others on how to use a mental map to read Ernest Holmes. What follows is a modified version of that presentation. And I hope you find it interesting and useful, whether you're new to his writings or if you're a longtime student of Science of Mind. So let's get started. As you can see, I mentioned here on the screen that it is a lesson in metaphysics. So even though I am encouraging you to see this as a technique for reading and understanding Holmes and other metaphysical teachers, you're going to learn some metaphysical concepts along the way. Now, my intentions for this particular lesson is to, as you can see on the screen, recognize that we all have a mental map and give some thought as to what our map looks like. Outline a mental map that may assist you in reading and understanding Ernest Holmes specifically and other metaphysical teachers in general. And along the way, I'm going to offer you a number of quotes from Holmes that will both build the map and help you better understand him. So that's where we're going. And we're going to begin by having a couple of quotes from a couple of books by Ernest Holmes, and we'll revisit these quotes later on. But we'll start with this one from his Science of Mind textbook, where he wrote, "All men seek some relationship to the universal mind, the oversoul, or the eternal spirit, which we call God. And life reveals itself to whoever is receptive to it. That we are living in a spiritual universe, which includes the material or physical universe, has been a conclusion of the deepest thinkers of every age. That this spiritual universe must be one of pure intelligence and perfect life, dominated by love, by reason, and by the power to create, seems an inevitable conclusion." Now, if you're new to Science of Mind and Ernest Holmes, you may read that and pick up a few ideas, but a lot of it may be something that you think is just gobbledygook and doesn't make a lot of sense. If you're a seasoned student of Holmes, you probably understand at some level what that statement means. Like I said earlier, we're going to come back and revisit this later on at the end of the presentation, and hopefully when I read it again, it'll make great sense to you. Here's another one from the latest book that was compiled and published a couple of years ago, Ernest Holmes at Asilomar. In this one, Ernest says, "This is the only important talk I'll have given this week, and it probably will sound so simple and like there's not much to it, but it's all leading up to a simplicity so great that Jesus said, 'It is like the kingdom of heaven,' but nobody would believe it. We begin by identification through contemplation to identify ourselves with that which is beyond us, which really is already within us, but hasn't come out of us in a kind of reflection. Now this is called mysticism." Again, may or may not make sense to you, but we'll come back at the end and hopefully it will. So, oftentimes when people first encounter Ernest Holmes, there's a lot of ways in which we give them some traditional tips on how to read and understand him. One of the suggestions is, if you're reading especially the Science of Mind textbook, is if you look up terms you're not aware of, go back to the back of the book and use the glossary. There's a very extensive glossary, Science of Mind textbook, that explains a lot of the terms. But if you're new to the philosophy, you might find the glossary definitions even sort of confusing in and of themselves. There's also a little book that Ernest Holmes published called the New Thought Dictionary, which has similar words and sometimes the same words as the back of the Science of Mind textbook, but defines them in different ways. And it's a good book to have by you as you're reading Holmes. Another tip to understanding him is to recognize that he has this sort of what seems like at first random capitalization of words that you're wondering, why is he capitalizing them? Now I'm going to stress this later on, but the quick answer is that when they're capital, they reference some aspect of that as God or spirit or the all or in some higher macrocosm of life. And the non-capitalized versions of the same words represent that term being used as in our everyday life of human existence. So capitalizing and non-capitalizing sort of gets at something we're going to cover later on, which is the realm of life in which he's talking about it. One of the other tips we often suggest is to read some of the easiest Ernest Holmes books. I know myself, I suggest to people that they either read The Essential Ernest Holmes, a compilation of some of his quotes and longer pieces with some limited commentary by my colleague Jesse Jennings, who compiled the book about 25 years or so ago. It's a good introduction as it outlines the teaching of Ernest Holmes and uses a lot of the words of Holmes with minimal explanation, but some explanation by Jennings to help you understand it. So the layout and flow is a little bit different, and it's an easy way to introduce yourself to the writings of Holmes. But a lot of people that I know that I've pointed that book to still find some difficulty in it. Another common book we often use is this thing called Life, a very inspiring and inspired book that teaches and talks the science of mind in very nice and wonderful language that I think a lot of people find very, very accessible to them. And then another way we suggest it is to read other authors who explain the science of mind in contemporary terms. In fact, I know a lot of my colleagues who have written a lot of books that are really all ways in which trying to get the ideas of Holmes across in other words for a modern audience. And I would say even my books that I've published all have a degree of explaining science of mind within them. Now, what I'm going to do here is offer you a non-traditional tip for reading and understanding Holmes. I want you to create a mental map of how the universe works and refer to it as you read him. And you can use this map when you're reading other metaphysical teachers, and you may be wondering, what is a mental map? So that's what we're going to get into now. What do we mean by a mental map? Well, we all have maps in our own awareness. Think about when you walk around in the world, physical world, you drive someplace, you're walking in a park or wherever, you've already mentally know where things are. You have a spatial orientation, how things are placed in relation to one another. And by using that map, it helps you navigate through the physical world. And, and as things change in the physical world, we sometimes have to reorient or change or update our mental map to reflect the new environment in which we're moving. Or if you go to a new city and you've never been there before, you find yourself building up over time a new way of understanding and mapping how this new place you're living is laid out. So we create these mental maps all the time for navigating around within the physical world. What I want us to consider is that we also create a mental map of other parts of reality other than the physical world. We have this mental maps that answer big and deeper questions like what is reality and what is the meaning of life and what is my purpose. And whether we realize it or not, we also create a little map in our minds that guides how we look at the world and extract meaning from the world. And now, there is a common mental map that's used by a lot of people who are driven by their religious faith. We can take especially in the Western world, a lot of people have a Christian faith that believes in the Bible being the inerrant Word of God, and that Jesus was born and died for our sins, and the entire package of beliefs and dogma that come through a Christian faith, be it whatever flavor, it creates a worldview in our mind of how the world works, and that's why a lot of people who believe in the Bible as strict literal interpretation of the Word of God, it's difficult for them to get them off that worldview because it is inherent in how they look at life. And when you say, well, I believe differently from you, they're going to go back to what is their important anchor of faith and truth, which is their belief in the Bible. And other faiths and religions have the same sort of thing. So there are many people who sort of create a view of the world based around how they see spiritual teachings that have given their life great meaning. Another worldview that's very common in our culture is people who are driven by belief that only the physical and material universe is real. You know, that they can break things down to the subatomic particles who develop over time to larger and larger aspects of physical expressions in the world. And this whole material world they see as simply physical stuff. And again, you know, you can say, okay, there's a lot of truth in that, just like there was a lot of truth in the religious beliefs, but there are little limitations that sometimes come up when people see things or little chinks in that worldview and things it's not able to explain, like a consciousness or psi phenomenon. And many times people have the hold these worldviews will cover over, just like the people with religious views, will cover over their gaps in their map by saying, well, at some time we'll understand it, or it's all something that's given rise by the workings of the physical universe, and we just haven't explored it and understood it yet, or they deny its reality, even though many of us may have the experience of something. So there's areas where the material worldview is not totally adequate for all aspects of life, but many people hang on to it as how they look at life. And that's okay. Everybody's free to believe whatever they want. What I'm going to be offering here and what I think is can be a relevant worldview, and whether you believe it or not, if you'll find it by at least considering this worldview a way of reading Holmes and other teachers so that you understand what their intent was, is to apply what I'm calling the spiritual but not religious worldview and linking it with the material. So there has to be some aspect of where the religious spiritual worldview links to the material worldview, and we see them in combination with one another. So what we're building towards is a mindset that incorporates everything that we experience as human spiritual beings. Now, again, we all have these spatial maps or mental maps. And understanding our maps and how we see and relate to our world can give us value not only in reading teachers, but to understand how we apply and how we give thought to what is going on in the world around us and how we judge it and see it. It gives meaning to our life. But we all carry a worldview. And it's essentially what I want you to see is that you have a worldview right now, a mental map of how you see the universe working, and is to bring it into conscious awareness so you can see, do I need to tweak it and change it? Now, one of the things to consider is, how do our maps include certain things? Do they include a description of how the physical world works? Do they give us guidance on how we should have relationships with others and the meaning of relationships with others, other people, and the world at large? Does our world view or our world map give us guidance on moral actions that we take in the planet? Does it explain the actions of consciousness or mind? Does it offer us ideas on why love is? Or is there a God or a spirit in the universe? And if so, how does it fit into our map? How did things come into existence in the first place? Why is it that we experience time as we move through life? Is there a meaning to life? And overall, can our map explain such things as life itself, death from this physical life, and if there is some kind of eternal life? Now, if your map doesn't account for all of those, you may want to look at that and say, is there a gap in my map? And create, how can a gap in my map feed me an opening for me to learn and explore my map a little bit more and see if I can find out how my map of the universe can perhaps explain that aspect. Now, every map should explain these. Now, I'm going to be offering you a map in a few moments, and I will clearly say right at the outset that I'm not going to address every one of these topics. However, I think that the map I offer you does give an explanation for them. It's just in this video, it would get overly long if I tried to explain how the map addresses every one of these. But I want you to think about these as you have your own map in mind, or as you go through the map that I offer to you, and think about how it might explain these particular questions. And again, are there any important aspects of your life not explained by your map? Because you want to look at those little gaps and see how they can be filled with an expanded version of your mental map. So, Having said all that, I want to briefly glance at a few spiritual maps. And as I go through these, my intent is not to explain them or make you understand them in any way. In fact, I would say that some of these I don't fully understand, but I've pulled them from different sources because I thought they were rather interesting as how different people over time have tried to create a physical representation of how the universe works to help others understand it. And you're going to notice some similarities as I move through these maps. And I want you to not necessarily be looking for how to understand the maps, but looking for little patterns in them that maybe have similarities that can give guidance to us on the building of our own map. Okay, here are two. Again, just glance at them. You can read some of the words on them. I'll leave it up for a moment. You know, you can always pause this video if you want to look at something a little bit longer, but I'm not going to linger over all of these maps that I'm showing you. Just want you to look for patterns and ideas, the flow of them, the organizational structure, that sort of stuff. Here's a couple more. And we're looking for ideas on similarities between them. Here's another one. Many of you who are students of New Age concepts are probably familiar with the chakras and the explanation of the chakras tied to various bodies, emotional, mental, astral, etc. But that too is a form of a mental map. Here's a couple of representations of what's called the Tree of Life from the Jewish mysticism, the Kabbalah. Again, just look at the patterns and ideas, the flow. And here's a couple of others, a little more esoteric perhaps. Talking about multiple bodies, higher self, man's response to vibrations. Just look at them again, looking for any commonalities on all of the maps. Here's one I want to talk about just a little bit in more detail. And you may want to, if you're not familiar with a great chain or a great nest of being, you may want to go Google this and study it a little bit more. I think I've written some on my website about it. But it generally represents, through this great chain or nest of being, an opportunity to look at the various maps people have created and bring them together in one structure. So it's the first sort of integral map in trying to map the idea of the universe. And although they appear differently, if you look at the one on the left, you see it talks about a sense of minerals growing to plants, to animals, to man, to angels and God. So there's sort of a stratification from lower to higher as you move up this chain of being. And they're overlapping, so there's a degree of interconnection between them. If you look over on the right-hand side of the screen, this is expressing the same thing but in a different way. It's like as you're looking downward through concentric circles all the way down to the bottom. Read the upper words, upper half screen, starting with matter. Matter relates to minerals, but all of physical matter moves up into life, and then mind, and then soul, and then spirit. So you see, you're moving from the physical up until the non-physical and up into the higher and spiritual realms. So again, a stratification. And again, they're interwoven or within each other. So that's not dividing them, it's just representing that we're taking that oneness and looking at them in sort of a stratified way. So again, it's the great chain or nest of being. Here's another one. I've always been a big fan of Ken Wilber and his integral theory. I have a video, which is, or a couple of videos actually, which are linked to in the show description, where I years ago did some descriptions on summaries of Ken Wilber's work and his integral theory, which you may find interesting. But for right now, we're just looking at the patterns. And as you look at it, you can see on the left-hand screen side of the screen is what is called his four quadrants, those four boxes, which represent on the left-hand side our interior states of awareness, and on the right-hand side our exterior observations and interactions with the physical world. So again, the left is our inner world, the right is our outer world. The upper half of that bigger square is the individual state of that. So we have our interior individual awareness, our exterior individual actions, and the lower half of it is the same states of interior and exterior from a group or collective state of mind. And we take those four quadrants and say that we experience and grow through them in multiple intelligences. And I've outlined those values or intelligences on the right-hand side and the questions they ask and who was the principal teacher of that particular item. Again, all you need to really consider that is looking at the inner and outer states of our world from an individual and collective state, and that we grow and evolve in multiple ways through multiple aspects of intelligences. If you want more, watch the videos linked to in the show description. Similarly, this model of spiral dynamics is another map of the world that uses values. And if we look at the bottom, it moves from survival instincts in the early days of human worldviews up to the higher levels of a global holistic worldview. A minute ago I talked about the fact that there's many people who have a mental map that expresses itself or is tied to religion, and if their religious worldview is what drives a lot of their viewpoint in the world, they're probably in that truth and order level of this particular map. If their mindset is towards science and materialistic science specifically, they're probably anchored into that strategic enterprise level. And the spiritual but not religious viewpoint comes in the green humanistic egalitarian aspect, as well as the higher stages as we move up this development. Again, if you want to know more about spiral dynamics, very popular video I did a number of years ago, and it's linked in the show description for more. But all I want you to see is that this is a map, a mental map that's trying to explain aspects of the universe, and that we map it and explain it, and we're looking at common characteristics. So the question then becomes, do you notice any similarities as I go through those maps? And again, you can stop and back up and review the video and look through the maps again, but I'm going to give you my summary, and you may have different ones, but I'm going to give you what I see as the similarities, and these similarities will help us think about what maps what characteristics can we employ in our own map as we're creating a mental map that maybe have been employed in other maps by other people, and we can pick and choose the ones that make most sense for us. But the similarities that I specifically saw in the maps that I offered you was that they all, or most of them all, had these characteristics. They made a distinction between higher and lower. There was an upper part of it and there was a lower part of it. They tended to include both the material world and the non-material world. That there was some aspect of them that related to the physical stuff going on, and yet an inner world or a spiritual world was also a part of the maps. In most of the maps, when they stratified these differences, they made the higher and the non-material closer or higher up on the spectrum, so closer to truth, closer to spirit, etc., and that the lower and the material aspects of the world were farther from that truth. They tended to show specialized centers. Oftentimes these were little circles or whatever. They said, okay, this is an area where this is particular energy is expressed, or this is where we see this played out in life. So they had specialized centers that were in relation to one another, so that they linked in some way, they had a path between them in some way, so there was a flow in some way between different localized centers in the maps. They also suggested by that a flow of energy between the different centers or parts of the map, that you moved in different directions from one area to another. And this movement oftentimes moved upward from lower levels of the map to higher upward areas of the map, hence implying a degree of evolution by the way of upward growth. And one final commonality that I saw, all of the maps seemed to be showing an overall unity that everything is interconnected, so that even though they're breaking things into parts, by the very nature that they're putting them all on the map, tends to show that there's a relationship between the things in the map which represents a unity of the map. So, you may have gotten different commonalities than mine. Be sure to, if you did, put them in the show description or in the comments, and I would love to hear what you thought. But these were the ideas that I gathered from going through these particular maps. And what I'm looking for, again, is the similarities. So, at this point, what I want us to do is to begin creating a useful mental map. But before we do that, I want to give you some caveats, some things to be wary of. The map that you create, first off, has to be your own. So even though I'm going to be walking us through a suggested map, I want you to feel free to modify it. Make it something that is, as it says later on the screen, useful to you, that has meaning for you. So you have to, if something I throw in there doesn't make sense to you or doesn't give you any meaning, toss it out. If there's things or aspects of life that are meaningful to you that I did not include in the map, put them in for yours. Create the map that is useful for you. So that's the very first thing I want to stress for you. Build off of my suggested one, toss things that don't work, add in things that do for you. Secondly, keep in mind, and it's almost a cliche, but a map is not the territory. We know that when we're looking at a physical map, that it doesn't represent the land that we're trying to walk through or drive through. We know the map is not the territory. It's the same when we make maps of the world in our mind. When we map the universe and how it interplays in our minds, we have to keep in mind that that map that we've created is not the truth that is out there that we're absorbing and reflecting upon. There is a greater truth of the world, and the map is just simply something that, as the last idea says there, it's simply a tool to help us grasp concepts which may be hard to understand otherwise. We break things down into parts so we can put them back together and understand them at a different level. And that's what the map making is for you, is to break down the map of the universe into its parts and put it back together into a universal whole that then gives you new insights and understanding about it. Now, in relation to those caveats, I want to leave you with a quote by Ken Wilber, who writes that the ultimate metaphysical secret, if we dare state it so simply, is that there are no boundaries in the universe. Boundaries are illusions, products not of reality, but of the way we map and edit reality. And while it is fine to map out the territory, it's fatal to confuse the two. So we're about to create a mental map, but I want you to remember that when I break things apart, they're all interwoven in a unity, so that we might consider that every point within the universe in which we experience has both a material and a non-material aspect to it, and everything that we break into or draw boundaries around in our mental maps are all contained, much like in a hologram, where it contains all of the information about the entire holographic picture. The entire universe contains within every aspect of it everything that is in the entire universe. So we have to keep that in mind, that there are no boundaries at all, and everything is in its entirety expressed everywhere. So let's begin with a mental map that, if you're a student of Ernest Holmes, you might be familiar with. It's the teaching symbol that's found in various varieties in the back of the Science of Mind textbook. So I'm going to briefly go through this. If you're familiar with Science of Mind, you've probably encountered this before, but I do want to explain it for those of you who may be new to Ernest Holmes, is that this circle represents the universe, both the world of form and the world of non-form, that is, material stuff and non-material stuff. And at the top it represents the universal conscious mind or spirit. And the center area is what he calls unformed matter, or the subjective mind. It's also called soul, or sometimes, but not necessarily on this graphic representation, called the law. But both those top two are the non-material aspects of the universe, and the bottom third represents the physical world as we know it. And he calls it form, or the mirror of matter, or particularization. But you might think of the top as spirit, the center as soul, and the bottom as the body. Okay? The top two are the non-physical universe. The bottom is the physical universe. And what he's reflecting in this particular symbol, and the point he's trying to get across through the downward V, is that our conscious thoughts, reflected in the top third, flow through an aspect of non-physical reality that act upon them. That's the middle area of the symbol, and that it then becomes manifest into physical form in the bottom third of the circle. So the entire circle in and of itself is the entire universe of God or spirit that includes both the world of form, the world of non-form, and all of the laws that are within it. But it's taught as the flow of conscious thought through a law into the creation of the physical world through the power of our thinking. Now, there's much more I could say on that, but that gives you enough just to get us going and looking at and understanding the concept of this Ernest Holmes map. Now, within it, it creates boundaries within oneness. So keep in mind the quote that we just read from Ken Wilber, that boundaries aren't real. But we're creating some artificial boundaries within oneness by the very nature we start drawing these lines around. Notice that and I've already stressed this, that it involves both the physical world and the non-physical. That it includes both spirit and mind and body. Whereas mind in this, well, mind is sort of both in the top and the middle. So you'll notice conscious mind and then subjective mind, but both the two aspects of the top are an aspect or an expression of what Holmes calls mind. And so those are in the top two aspects of the teaching symbol. It shows a movement, a flow downward, and in my mind also back up, because things that fall into form, unformed matter forms into form, and it breaks down and returns back into unformed matter. And so there's a continuous flow represented by this symbol between the world of non-form and the world of form. This is used to teach how non-physical thoughts create physical reality, like I've said, and it applies to the macrocosm and the microcosm. What do we mean by that? When I first came into Science of Mind, this idea of macrocosm and microcosm was stressed in the very first class. I was over my head at the time. I got a general understanding of it, but through time I became aware of a deeper meaning in it that I really appreciated. But when they talk about the idea of the macrocosm, they're saying that the teaching symbol applies in our understanding of how the principles and laws of the universe apply at the highest levels of the all or God. So if you think of how the process of thoughts flow through a law to manifest the physical universe, it explains it both in the level of God creating the world, that's the macrocosm, but the microcosm is how it plays out in our understanding of the principles and laws at the level of us as individual humans. So we can think of it that I as a human think, and my thinking is acted on by a law to create something within my physical life. So the macrocosm is how God uses the laws to the manifestation of the physical universe, and the microcosm is how us individual humans or individualized expressions of the one use the power of thoughts at our own level of our own lives to create life. So it's the big and the little, if you want to simplify it. And we'll come back to this later on as we build our map as well. Okay, so do you see any commonalities, any connections between the two? Hopefully you do. Hopefully you do. There is an interlocking interplay between various expressions of the one life, and we're trying to figure out how the one life moves between the non-material and the material, and how they all have an interplay. Okay? So, at this point, what we're going to do is we're going to look at a lot of quotes from Ernest Holmes. And as I read through the quotes, Some of them I will just read, others I will expand on just a tad to help make sure you understand the key concepts I want to get out of them. And then at a certain point, after a number of quotes, I'm going to stop and we're going to create a summary list of the ideas that we have gathered from the quotes and use that for the beginnings of our mental map. This first wave of quotes are going to be on the topics of involution and evolution. Now, I've done videos on involution and evolution and written a lot about it, and I'll link some stuff in the show description below if you want to go deeper on that topic. But at the very beginning here, I want to bring about those concepts to help us build our map. Now, with this very first quote, I want to stress a couple of things to you. One is that you can pause the video if you want to linger over a quote a little bit longer to read it until you understand it. Again, I am going to summarize everything as we go through a number of quotes. And the other thing I want to point out is that on each of the screens, if you want to know where this quote comes from, because I've pulled them from lots of different Ernest Holmes sources, there will be a little note on there. I'm not going to read those notes, but you can see where the quote is from by looking at what I've placed on the screen. Okay, let's get into it. We have to start with the proposition that all things are possible to God, that God makes everything out of himself by the very simple process of becoming the thing he makes. There is no struggle, no holding of thoughts, no willpower involved. So, the entire universe is made out of God stuff. When anyone prays, he's dealing with involution, the first step of the creative order. This is what the Bible calls the Word. That which follows is evolution, or the unfolding of the word or concept into objective existence. You might think of it as that involution is the divine or God or spirit involving itself into its creation. So as it creates, it puts a little bit of itself and all of its characteristics into its creation. And then it's a creation that evolves. We have to suppose the involution not as a time when God began to create. In the beginning, God does not mean in the beginning of creation, but in the beginning of any creative series. This is different. You know, we tend to think that God created the universe and then stepped aside and is not involved in everything. But every time something is created through the level of spirit or through the level of our understanding as individualized expressions of spirit is the beginning of a new creative series. So when we are creating through the power of our thinking, we are using the process of involution, in Holmes' words. We tend to think of involution, or I do, as the macro level of God, but involution is also occurring when we think and create something and we're embedding spirit within our creation, because everything is God. We are made out of a pattern of perfection. When we become disconnected from that pattern, we long to return to it. This is why we have pain. The pain disappears when we return to wholeness. There is a perfect pattern and we believe in it. And this perfect pattern is where we are and not somewhere else. It's already within us. This is the divine incarnation, the involution. Key in this quote is to understand that in this physical manifestation of ourselves is a non-physical pattern of perfection that comes from a different realm. And we're longing to return to that pattern of perfection. That in our experiences here in physical life, we often don't experience the pattern of perfection, but we desire it. Evolution, being the result of involution, is merely the awakening of instrumentalities to their office and their relationship to essences. I'll say it again and think about this for a long time, because that is really something. Evolution is an awakening of instrumentalities to to the essence which is already within them, pushing out for self-expression, that the universe, whose whole creation exists for its own delight, may delight itself in everything that it does and sees in you, and in me, that which it knows itself to be, without effort. Key in this quote to understand is that there is embedded in us divine qualities which are called to be expressed, that there is an essence already within us that is divine or spiritual, and it's desiring to be expressed through the desires that we feel for self-expression. And that this entire universe, at the macro, it was created for the delight of spirit itself. So the very nature that we're called to express our lives is for our delight, and at the macro level of divine, spirit is expressing, or experiencing rather, delight through our experiencing delight and our self-expression. Thomas Troward, who was a major influence on Ernest Holmes, says that the Bible begins with this great principle of self-pronouncement, the involution of spirit, the passing of spirit, as it were, pure intelligence into thought. Next follows evolution, or the passing of thought into form. And he very carefully explains that that is why there are two accounts of creation in the Bible. In the first account, it says man is made in the image and likeness of God, and in the second account, that man is made out of the dirt. So we have the ideal, and then the ideal taking form. The eternal taking form must be in unity with all form. So we find the stuff out of which all our human beings are made is the same etheric substance out of which all things are made. So in this quote, Holmes is explaining, using Troward, why there's two accounts in Genesis for our creation, and they're both metaphysical explanations. One is that God is within us, but we're also created out of the dirt, which is spiritual stuff. There is a higher ideal that is taking form, and that ideal is calling forth to be expressed. You often hear the terms, the ideal made real, recognizing that we are seeking some ideal from a spiritual realm to be expressed in the form or made real. The veil between spirit and matter is very thin. The invisible passes into visibility through our faith in it. Out of the liquid of faith, the solid of fact is formed. Again, Holmes is saying here that there is liquid and formed matter, and they're all spiritual. And then what we experience as physical matter comes in and out of a non-physical state, but it's always spirit. Spirit in a non-solid state and spirit in a solid state. Every form is in effect. Every form is liquid. Every form is transparent. Every form contains a light which can be seen. Every form responds to the language that addresses it with a consciousness of union with it, from the lowest to the highest forms of life. From the mind that sleeps in the mineral, waves in the grass, awakes the simple consciousness in the animal, and self-consciousness in humanity, and God consciousness in the upper hierarchies. The very key to spiritual mind healing is a consciousness that we are living in a spiritual universe now, a living universe now, and that there is no difference between mind and what mind does. No matter how solid things look in reality, they are liquid. Here's a definition of evolution from the New Thought Dictionary: a gradual unfoldment of development, the progress of a race or a species from a lower form of existence into higher forms, in line with the principle of life, which is ultimate perfection. This does not imply that there will ever be a stopping point, for it is the nature of life to forever unfold into higher and higher expressions of being. Again, when something is involved with spirit and left into form, and the form evolves back, it's evolving into higher and higher expressions of being. Similarly, the definition of evolution from the Science of Mind textbook, evolution is the time and the process through which an idea unfolds to a higher state of manifestation. And since ideas are divine realities, evolution will go on forever. Evolution is the emergence of that which already is in form and in ever upward spiraling. The ascending arc of a circle is a term used to symbolize the evolutionary force, both personal and cosmic, by which the individual rises from gross materiality into the realm of pure spirit, the resurrection principle. And of course, an ascending arc is a spiral. And one of my favorite quotes, through the eons of time, life has been slowly climbing up the ladder of unfoldment to the present self-conscious state achieved in man. Some degree of consciousness exists in everything, because everything is some form of spirit, and spirit is intelligence. However, there are degrees of intelligence or consciousness. We often hear the expression, consciousness sleeps in mineral life, dreams in plant life, awakens in animal life, and comes to self-consciousness in man. Man then stands at the very peak of the evolutionary climb. He is now a self-conscious individual, which means that he not only knows, but knows that he knows. He can think about his own consciousness, and he now has the power of choice, the very summit of life's upward striving. Evolution, through infinite ages, has done much for him. Okay. Let's look at some commonalities or summarize the quotes that we've just gone through. And again, I encourage you that as you're reading the quote, and if I'm going too fast, pause the video. But here are the things that I want you to get from the quotes that we just went through, which all dealt with the process of involution and evolution. First, spirit makes everything manifest out of itself. Next, mind or consciousness exists in everything. Next, the creative process in the macrocosm begins by spirit thinking, which is simply a movement of consciousness, whereby it involves itself into its creation, the entire manifest universe. This process is going on continuously. Spirit involves or embeds itself within its creation a pattern of perfection, which we also call wholeness. And it also embedded in everything a divine creative spark, a spark that calls things to be creative in some capacity. And other divine characteristics or qualities were also embedded into its creation. Everything is made from quote-unquote spiritual stuff, liquid spirit that has temporarily taken form in the material world, although it's temporarily forgotten that it's spiritual. So you and I in our physical forms are liquid spirit. Everything around us in the material world is a hardening of this liquid spirit into form before it melts back into the non-form, non-physical rather. The creative process in the microcosm of humans begins by you and I, individualized expressions of God or spirit, thinking, again, a movement of consciousness, and those thoughts being acted upon by a spiritual law to create our life. The material world is in a process of evolving back to spirit. First by its evolution into more complex physical forms, until in humans it crossed a threshold of self-awareness. And then further and higher evolution is occurring in consciousness itself. So that's a quick summary. You might have picked up some other things, but these are the points that I want to stress as we now begin building a map. It's a very simple map. We have spirit or God at the top, and we have the material universe at the bottom. We have a downward arrow saying that God or spirit involved itself into the material universe, and the material universe is growing and evolving back to spirit or God. That's the key thing that I want you to form into your awareness as part of your mental map. So now we have some more quotes, not as many the next couple of times, but they're also key for us to build upon this map. This is a rather long one. There cannot be a physical universe that is separated from a mental, and a mental separated from a spiritual. And the knowledge that there cannot be is the key to spiritual mind healing, consciously used. In other words, we neither materialize spirit nor spiritualize matter. We are not using a spiritual power to make a material law work in accord with good, and we're not using a mental power to control a physical power, which is out of line. These things have no existence outside of our own imagination. And in saying this, we're not denying either the physical form or its mental equivalent. But really we're postulating the theory that the mental image in mind and the form it takes out there are not two different things, but one and the same, equal, identical, and interchangeable. And that consciousness is superior to both because they are the action of consciousness, producing a two-faced unity of temporary liquidity and temporary solidness. Now, there's a lot in this, but the key point to take in mind, and it gets back into that pattern, that divine pattern that exists in the spiritual world, is there's a pattern of perfection. But when we use consciousness, consciousness is in everything, and that when we use the power of thinking in the mental realm, or a mental power to create a physical world, all we're doing is using a movement of consciousness itself, consciousness moving to create out of the liquidity of spirit both the thought that we're experiencing as the thought and the solid item that shows up in the material world. Okay? Now, whether you believe that or not, just hold that idea from this quote as we continue on moving through and creating this map. Holmes also wrote, "In my Father's house are many mansions," a quote from the Bible. And he says it refers to ascending planes of consciousness, the eternal expansion, progressive evolution, the future state as one of development. Ascending planes of consciousness is the key thing to take away. The mental plane is just between the spiritual and the physical. The three planes intersphere each other. I like that word. It's a word that I've never heard outside of writings of Holmes, but intersphere you might think of as like a Venn diagram where circles overlap. And what he's saying here is that there's a physical, a mental, and a spiritual plane, and that they overlap one another. The laws of the universe are not in opposition to each other. They exist in different levels and different planes. The law of magnetism on the physical plane operates as the law of attraction on the mental plane. Cosmic consciousness is not exalted consciousness on this plane. It's ordinary consciousness on another plane. What he's trying to get us to see here is that the laws and the ways things show up vary between the different planes of existence. We live on three planes. We're spirit, soul, and body. We meet people on all three planes: spiritual, mental, and physical. If there is in us a spiritual transcendence, if there is a universal concept, people will feel it. If there is in us a deep love for everyone, they will like it. If consciously or unconsciously we are embracing the world, they will know they are included. Key points here is that we are on three different planes and we're interacting with each other not only in the physical, but the mental and the spiritual. We tend to think that we're interacting only in a physical world, but our interactions are playing out on multiple planes simultaneously. And it's the very nature that things, we feel a connection to others or love for others, is because of this interplay on other planes. So let's stop again and summarize the quotes we've just gone through and add to our map. Here's what my common points that I wanted to take away from these were. There are different planes of existence which overlap one another. These planes are spirit, mind, and body. That our laws operate differently on the different planes, and our experience of consciousness varies on the different planes. So let's add these ideas to our map. Again, we have the beginnings of the map, and we've now added three planes of existence into it. That the involution flows through the spiritual plane, down through the mental plane, into the physical, and the physical evolves back up from the physical through the mental to the spiritual. Okay, now I've temporarily popped onto the screen some words which are synonyms for those planes of existence. And I've done that because you're going to encounter these words as you read Ernest Holmes. And you want to ensure that when you're reading them that you think about them in terms of a different plane of existence. Now, first off, when Ernest writes about the spiritual plane, he typically, again, will capitalize the word. And when he writes about the physical plane, he doesn't capitalize the word. And you're going to find words like spirit, God, the all, the absolute, the timeless, the eternal, the divine, the infinite. All of these represent a state of being or expression on the highest spiritual plane of existence. Whereas when we talk about the physical or material world, the relative, time, the finite, or multiplicity, we're talking about things that are expressing down in the physical world, and to a degree the mental plane. The mental plane incorporates concepts that involve both those words from the spiritual plane as well as the words from the material plane. So again, the intersphere concept. Now these three planes of existence, spirit, mind, and body, should be somewhat common to you. They're used a lot, especially in the metaphysical and New Age worlds, to reflect the different ways in which we express in life. And if you go out on the internet and you search on ideas regarding spirit, mind, and body, you'll find plenty of graphics like this one that show them as interlocking circles, much like, again, a Venn diagram. And they often teach these in trying to understand how mind and spirit work together, or how body and mind work together, how body and spirit work together, etc. And then a balance between those three is that little area in the center where it's considered wholeness, where we can bring our body, mind, and spirit into an alignment where they're equally honored and they're all working together in a flow state, in harmony is how Holmes defined it. Then we would be in a state of wholeness, and that's what that little center represents. But this is just another map. It's not the reality. It's just a way of trying to show these three aspects of the one and how they interplay with one another. If I were to take these circles of spirit, body, and mind and put them back on our other map, I would probably put them like this, where you can see on my sliding scale, moving from the physical plane up to the spiritual plane, that there is body at the bottom, mind in the middle, and spirit at the top, and that the circles overlap. But again, it's just a different representation where I'm throwing boundaries into something that don't have any boundaries. Because body, mind, and spirit, these three planes, they're not different places. We're using words like higher and lower just as a mental construct for understanding them. But they all exist simultaneously everywhere. And you must keep that in mind. The map is not the territory. This is just our way of stretching things and dividing them up to look at them so that we understand them in a different and deeper way. Okay? So let's continue. The body of God is the entire manifestation of spirit, both visible and invisible. Within this one body of God are included all lesser bodies. This one body, coupled with the intelligence running through it, is called the Son, or the second person of the Trinity. This, of course, includes humanity, both visible and invisible. It also includes every gradation of consciousness, from the simple to the complex, from a cell to an archangel. All are parts of one stupendous whole, whose body nature is, and God the soul, he quotes. In short, it is the entire manifestation of spirit on any and all planes. In my Father's house are many mansions. We do not, of course, see all these mansions, but science has revealed to us that many exist which we do not see, and revelation has shown that the universe is infinite, for we know in part. He's saying a lot there. I won't go into all he's saying, but he is pointing out again that there are many gradations or levels of consciousness as we move through the planes of existence, and that although science is opening us up to some understanding of us, so is revelation. And what is revelation? That is the findings and understandings of the workings of the universe via mystics. Those mystics who have gone before us and explored the inner workings of the universe. They've shown us that there are many, many levels and gradations. Next quote. Planes are different rates of vibration. When we speak of different planes of existence, we're not indicating places, localities. We're recognizing certain levels or stages of thought, planes of consciousness. As our minds expand, as our awareness increases, we advance from one plane to another, from the animal consciousness to the cosmic consciousness. Here, Holmes is introducing the idea not only of planes of existence, but different vibratory rates that exist or play out as we move up a spectrum from lower levels to higher levels, that there are different levels of vibration on the different planes of existence. These aren't in different places again, they're all throughout the entire universe. It's just simply how we're experiencing a particular aspect of plane. And as we grow in our own awareness, as we grow in our own consciousness, as we grow in our own understanding of the unity, we move upwards out of our animal nature into an understanding of cosmic consciousness as we grow and evolve and remember our truth. Suppose we should view the universe from 10 different planes. What would happen? We should see 10 times as much as we see now. There could be a form within the very form that one's body now occupies in space. There might even be a million bodies, each within the other, and each would be just as real as the one that we now think we occupy. The universe, as we see it, is not even a fractional part of the universe that actually is. And you read that and you can obviously think about parallel universes and alternate states and alternate bodies and all of the ways in which we can move up through the multiple bodies that are mapped, or that everything exists with just a slight of light difference away from one another. Our perception of this physical material universe and our anchoring our truth and its being our total existence limits us from seeing all these other planes of existence. But as we awaken on the spiritual path, we recognize their reality. As we meditate and practice spiritually, Our spiritual practices build up to the fact that there are planes of existence that exist beyond the material world. We expand our consciousness and awareness to a greater and broader universe than what we originally thought when we accepted the truth, the limited truth, that the physical universe was all that was. Science tells us that all form comes from one substance, made manifest through vibration. This further helps us to see the relationship of the word to the formless and teaches us the indestructibility and eternality of energy and cosmic stuff. The etheric body is the bridge of atomic matter between the emotional and physical bodies. It extends beyond the physical form and is the vehicle for finer vibrations than can be felt in the physical body. Again, vibrations and differences in the bodies and our experiences of bodies. All phenomena are determined by their rate of vibration, from what we term inanimate to man. The highest of God's creations, all are made of the one and only substance. The difference in the form is determined by the vibration. The world of form is the physical world about us. Anything that has definite shape, size, etc. has form. The specific qualities that make a thing what it is lend shape to its form. It is that distinctive quality that makes one thing appear as separate from another. It is a law that two forms of the same rate of vibration and manifesting on the same plane cannot occupy the same space at the same time. Everything that exists is original substance or ether in different rates of vibration. The world that seems so solid, so static, is a dynamo of activity, forever changing every second of time. No particle of man's body is the same from one moment to another. Each stands in the center of a moving, vibrating world, and the rate of the vibration depends upon the person. The higher and finer vibrations are the results of harmonious, joyous thought. The heavier and harsher vibrations occur when one is out of tune with the one indwelling presence that holds each in his true note of harmony. Man radiates what he will out into the ethers through the vibrational forces of his being. His very thought extends to the outermost reaches of the universe through this law of vibration. Again, a lot in this, but the key point is that we vibrate through the levels of our consciousness and our thoughts. Higher and finer vibrations are when we are in harmony with that divine pattern of spirit or God. But when we are bought into separation and fear and doubt and harsher and heavier vibrations, that's when we're out of tune with the infinite, out of tune with those divine patterns of spirit. And what we need to do is to bring our consciousness back into an alignment with spirit so we can vibrate at a higher level. Holmes also calls this many times a mental atmosphere that we create around ourselves. So again, let's stop and summarize our points. What we experience as different planes are really overlapping gradients of consciousness. Everything is in vibration, vibrating at different rates. The fastest vibrations are the highest levels of consciousness nearest the spiritual plane or God. The lowest vibrations are at the lowest and densest levels of consciousness in the material world. As we think, we create a vibratory level of consciousness which has an attractive force. Our thoughts, at the mental level, that vibrate in harmony with the pattern of perfection within the spiritual level, allow us to be in the flow and create that highest good. So now let's add these concepts into our map. Again, we have the downward flow, the upward flow, the various planes, but you'll notice the stuff on the either side of the map now added in. Looking at the left side of the screen for a moment, you'll notice that we have something that I've labeled the rate of vibration. And it's an arrow going from up and down, and up at the level of spirit is the highest and fastest vibrations, and down at the material realm are the lowest and slowest. We look over on the right-hand side of the screen, we do a very similar thing in terms of levels of consciousness. That the higher states of consciousness are in the spiritual plane and the lower states are anchored in the physical plane. So again, we're building within our awareness this map of spirit embedding itself into everything and it's evolving back into spirit. That we exist simultaneously on 3 different planes, but actually plane within plane because they're all interconnected with one another. That we can break them down into gradations of vibrations and levels of consciousness, slowest and lowest at the bottom in the material realm, and the highest and fastest up in the spiritual planes. Okay. Now we're going to build one more thing, go on to our map with one more quote. Holmes writes in her Declaration of Principles that this one manifests itself in and through its creation, but it's not absorbed by its creation. Again, this one, spirit, manifests itself in and through all creation, but is not absorbed by its creation. And this technically is called panentheism, as you see at the comment on the bottom of the screen, but it's a way in which we know that everything is God, but God is more than its creation. So let's put that into our map. So I'm basically drawing a circle around the map that we've built and showing you an aerial that spirit or God is outside this manifest universe. You might think that the creative force that created the universe in which we live and move and have our being is everything that is, but spirit is outside of this level of this universe. Spirit embedded itself into everything, the spiritual plane, mental, physical plane. It's all God, but God is more than that. In fact, there could be, and probably are, these universes upon universes upon universes being expressed simultaneously all over the place, and that there could be multiple spheres of this experience of spirit. Spirit could be experienced universes all over the place, and but the key concept is to recognize when you're reading Holmes that spirit can talk about spirit beyond this universe, but spirit's also in this universe expressing a spirit. I hope that makes sense. So now we got 3 different maps. Just pause for a moment and look at them. But the key right now is to form a mental map and see if this map or any of these maps resonate with you as you read through the words of Ernest Holmes and other metaphysical teachers. And again, create your own map. Parts that make sense to you, add in. Parts that don't, subtract. Now, here's an extra thought for you to think about. We talk about science a lot, and science in our common vernacular really means a technique by which we explore through empirical evidence things going on in the physical world. That's what our common use of the word science means. But when we introduce this mental map of multiple planes, it offers to us an expanded idea of science. So what I've got here with the 3 boxes is a representation again of the spiritual, mental, and physical planes, and that science plays out differently on each of the planes. The bottom box, our physical world, which we experience as form or matter, that what we typically call science is what's labeled here as natural science. It's that science that looks at and tries to measure the interactions of stuff in the physical world. But is science also playing out in a different way in the mental plane? People who are materialistic scientists may try to incorporate all of these into one. They say the only thing that is real is the physical world, and so they thoughts in mind, which I say are, and many mystics say, are part of the physical or mental plane rather, thoughts in mind in the mental plane, that mental science actually is a different level of science. It's looking and working on the idea of thoughts and mind and the use of mind. And that differs from natural science, which works towards the physical world. We look up to the highest boxes now in the spiritual realm. Spiritual realm is dealing with truth and ideals and those perfect patterns. Is there a different type of science that perhaps applies to ideas of truth and ideals? Well, it's often called spiritual science or religious science. And in fact, Holmes, in his writings, made no differentiation between spiritual and religious. In today's world, we often do make a distinction between what is religious and what is spiritual. There's some overlap, but we make a distinction that they're different. Holmes did not necessarily make that distinction, and hence he called his philosophy religious science for recognizing the fact that the aspects of a science applied at the realm of spirit had different techniques and methods and validations than what we might find in empirical evidence found at the physical plane. It's easy for us to think that the use of the power of thoughts and their manifestation on the physical plane is evidence, empirical evidence of religious science. But what I offer you to think about is that religious science really is the use of tools and techniques that are applied on different levels of being, rather than us applying to science to find something only on the physical plane. Something for you to think about as you look at and employ potentially this map that we've outlined over the preceding slides. Before we close and come back to our quotes, I do want to briefly look at a few other metaphysical teachers, since this is a method for employing, reading, and understanding them. William Walker Atkinson was a New Thought writer in the early part of the 20th century. He wrote a lot of books under not only his own name, but other pseudonyms. Probably one of his most famous books is one called the Kybalion, where he wrote it under the name The Three Initiates. I've got a lot of videos and blogs that are about the Kybalion. I'll put some links in the show description below. But look at the 7 Hermetic principles that he brings out in this book. Now, this book was published in 1908, and it precedes Ernest Holmes and his work. Holmes was well aware of William Walker Atkinson, and there are writings of his brother Fenwick Holmes who references the Kybalion and the writings of Atkinson as well. But as you read through those principles, obviously you're going to find a lot of similarity between those and the mental map that we've just crafted. I'm not going to read what's on the screen. You can pause it and read for them yourself, or go to the show description and find out more about the Kybalion. But I want to introduce you to the fact these concepts were already out there in the flow around Ernest and in other metaphysical teachers. And by employing the map we've just built, it helps you understand them a little bit better. Another teacher especially influential in Holmes and later in his life was the Indian teacher Sri Aurobindo, who wrote the massive 1,000-page book, The Life Divine. And it's been often written that Holmes in his later years read The Life Divine once a year for every year of his final years. Aurobindo lays out what he calls an integral yoga that tries to describe the world of both the world of form and the world of non-form, the material world and the non-physical world, as one world and their interactions between the two, and that consciousness is embedded in everything, and that what we are moving through is a process of involution and evolution through various levels of consciousness or mind. And what Aurobindo called us to was to develop our consciousness to higher levels of mind. And he talks about how mind plays out in lower levels where there's not self-awareness, and how it plays out into the physical, the vital, the mind, and then higher levels of overmind, developing up into overmind. He was really trying to encourage through the practice of integral yoga a conscious evolution of recognizing that we are expressions of the divine for the delight of the divine, and that by developing our higher levels of consciousness, we are moving up those levels and stages. Holmes was saying the same thing. Most metaphysical teachers speak to this process. Here's a more modern teacher saying the same thing. Many of you may be aware of the writings of the late David Hawkins, who used the process of kinesiology or muscle testing to create a scale or a map of consciousness. Now, what he does is use muscle testing or a manifestation of spirit through going strong or going weak in the physical form by testing against ultimate divine truths. You would question or ask a question relative to a truth of something, and it would map it and go weak or strong based on the level of its truth to spirit. And that as you moved up into higher levels of consciousness or understanding, as expressed on the chart on the screen, that you were not only moving towards enlightenment and closer to the absolute, but that you were evolving spiritually up the same patterns of evolutionary return to spirit. Again, the same pattern. And our map that we've played out helps us understand the work of David Hawkins, this book and his other books. So now we come back to the quotes we started with. And what I want you to do is to employ the mental map that we've created, or the one that you've come up with as you've gone through this process. And let's look at the same quotes again. Remember that when he capitalizes words, he's talking about the macrocosm of spirit, at the spiritual plane, or the spiritual level. All men seek some relationship to the universal mind, the oversoul, or the eternal spirit, which we call God. Here we are in the physical plane and our mental plane, and we're seeking a relationship to something even higher and greater, the spiritual plane. And life reveals itself to whoever is receptive to it. The more we can become receptive to God or spirit, the more that we see it. We're living in a spiritual universe, which includes the material or physical universe. That has been a conclusion of the deepest thinkers of every age. Some mystics have been telling us for years that we live in a spiritual universe, and we're experiencing is a physical universe, that we're spiritual beings moving through a human experience. That this spiritual universe must be one of pure intelligence and perfect life, dominated by love, by reason, and by the power to create, seems an inevitable conclusion. Again, that divine perfection within God is embedded in us and calling us back. In fact, the power of love. Love is an evolutionary force that is pulling us out of our sense of separation and back into a remembrance of our truth by connecting us with other expressions, be it animals or other people or the world. The power of love is moving us to remembering our truth. Let's look at the other quote. This is the only important talk I'll have given this week, and it'll probably sound so simple, there's just not much to it, but it's all leading to a simplicity so great that Jesus said, it's like the kingdom of heaven, but nobody would believe it. We begin by identification through contemplation to identify ourselves with that which is beyond us. But what is that that is beyond us? If we're physical material beings that are in the mental realm as well, what's beyond us is that spiritual realm, that the spirit is beyond us, that there is a higher and more divine aspect to being that exists above us that is calling us home. So we begin by contemplation to identify ourselves with that which is beyond us, but which really is already within us. It hasn't come, it's in us because it was embedded in us by the involutionary process at the beginning, but hasn't come out of us in a kind of reflection. We could talk more on that, but all of our lives and all of our consciousness is a reflection that within us is the life being reflected within our consciousness. That as we become aware of the non-dual states of life, we become more aware of the fact that the world that is out there, that we experience as separate from us, is really in us. And that's what he means by the reflection. And all of this, by contemplation, identifying ourselves with something greater that's already in us and is calling us to reflect it, is what mysticism is about. So maybe these quotes hopefully make a little more sense after going through the mental map. But here's a suggestion for you. If by going through this video, the map started forming in your awareness, then start looking at that map as you read other people, as you go back and look and read the words of Ernest Holmes. And I'd encourage you to play the video again and go through all the quotes that I went through. I went through them rather rapidly, but as you go through them a second time, I have no doubt that each one of them, with the use of that mental map held in your consciousness, is going to make more sense the second time and the third time around. I hope this video has been beneficial. I hope that you, by using the mental map idea, can make Ernest Holmes more accessible to you. And if you have questions about the map, please post them in the comments both on YouTube or wherever you're watching this video. I appreciate you taking the time for going through this, and I hope that you found it interesting and food for thought. Thank you.